Okay, today's daf in Masechet Avodah Zarah is Samach Zayin 67. And I would say, even yesterday, 2 days ago, we started this whole discussion, which we're going to go till the end of the Masechta with, of tam, right? Taste and bittul and things. And I would say the reason the dapim are so short is because it's so complicated, right? It sounds very easy, but because there's so much Tosfot and so
Yeah, I did
don't have a lot of Gemara. Makes our lives a little easier unless you really want to know what the halacha is, in which case your life would be very hard. So let's continue today. And I don't really know that we're going to get to the halacha because, it keeps going and going. And of course, this is one segment of a multi Masechta sugya, which is discussed in many other places. The big one is Chulin and Psachim, right? We're talking about Yain Nesach, which is why we got into it. In Chulin, we talk a lot about Isser and Heter. And in Psachim, we talk about chametz, right? Which are all very, very big examples of where we have the principle of bittul, right? Of how things combine. But to continue today at the two dots in Samach Zayin Amud Aleph, 4 lines from the top, the Mishnah said, Zeh klal, this is the rule. Kol shabahana'ato benotein tam, anything that it gives a favorable flavor, aser something, and if it doesn't aser. If it's notein tam lifgam, it gives a taste that is harmful, then it does not prohibit the thing. Says Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Hachi Helchata. Says Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, very simple, that's the halacha. If it's nothing tam lifgam, it's permitted. I mean, if you have an isser, even yain nesach in this case, that goes into something but ruins the taste, then it's not a problem. And of course, if it gives benefit, it is prohibited. So that's Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Now, furthermore, says Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, we just got started, Ken. We are right after the two dots. Said Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Lo shanu ela shenafal toch grisim rotchim. Right now, says Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, I just paskin that notin tam for benefit is prohibited and notin tam lifgam is prohibited. Pagam means damage. But the Mishnah's example, if you recall 2 days ago, was if you had a case of kigon chometz shenafal gabi grisim. You had vinegar that fell onto grisim. Grisim are some kind of beans. Someone will translate for me. Which is a bad thing. If you're cooking up your beans and you put vinegar in the water, it doesn't taste good. Or I don't exactly cook a lot of beans, but I guess that's what it was, right? So I don't know if it was a different kind of vinegar, different kind of beans, but that was their assumption.
Yeah.
It says Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel something very interesting today, which gets life very complicated. That's only true if the beans are boiling. You're cooking the beans, because then if you're cooking rotchim, if you're boiling the beans, then the vinegar is bad for them. If you got cold beans, you have like a salad bar, and you've got greens on your salad, not beans, sorry. Then and you put vinegar in them. That's a good thing. That's salad dressing, right? So vinegar is not a bad thing for cold beans. And so if you had cold beans, I guess cooked, and you cold them, you ate them with vinegar, it would be prohibited. But says Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, I'll take it even a step further. Let's say you take your cold beans, you mix vinegar in with them, and then you put them in the oven or you put them in the pot. And now the vinegar is going to damage them, but at the moment that you put the vinegar in, it actually benefited them. So you put the vinegar fell into the grisim tsoninim, and then here tichan, and then you boiled them, then it's prohibited, because pagam. It's as if you benefited it and then caused damage, meaning you put the milk in, let's say the milk into the meat, and made it taste better, then you boiled it and made it taste worse. But the fact is, it became prohibited the moment the vinegar went into the beans, because at that point, it was a good thing. And Tosfos points out, it's even if your intent was to cook it. So you didn't expect to eat it cold. You wanted to cook it. But the fact is that at that moment, it was prohibited because it was notein tam for benefit. So that's Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel says you have to look at not the ultimate goal, but the immediate goal.
Wait a minute, when we learned this a few days ago,
he quoted Rabba bar Rechana, the name of Rav Yochanan, who said, Lo shanu el shenafal toch grisim rotchim. And our Mishnah only permits the vinegar that's yain nesach if it falls into beans that are boiling, because then it's bad for them. But if it falls into cold beans, and then you boil them, then the asur. Then it would be prohibited, because when you put them into these cold beans, it was not a bad thing. It was actually a good thing for them. And the fact that you didn't want that and you were going to boil them up doesn't change the isur. And Chaim Kiyata Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came, he said the same thing, and the Gemara saves some space here and does not tell you what Rav Dimi said, but obviously it was the exact same halacha of Rabba bar Rechana, Rabbi Yochanan, etc., etc. And the reason we're quoting Rav Dimi is because after he said that, which is carbon copy, the v'chule, it's v'kach haya osim b'arvei Shabbatot b'tzipori. Rav Dimi gave us the great historical fact that on Erev Shabbat in Tzipori, when everyone was cooking up their cholent, in Tzipori, they had a very unique kind of cholent. And they would cook up beans with vinegar, where they would add the vinegar to the beans, and then they would cook it up. And it didn't taste like beans. It tasted like, I don't know, Beyond Burger or something. You know what I mean? They made it taste like something else. V'koren oto shachlayim. They called it shachlayim. What was shachlayim again? We talk about them all the time. Cress, I think, is shachlayim. So I don't exactly know what cress is either, but I guess in Tzipori, they love the taste of cress.
Cress is actually a salad.
Miriam, you're muted, or I don't hear you.
I am not muted.
Oh, sorry, my volume was off. Sorry.
Okay. That's why you couldn't hear us before.
What are you saying?
Cress,
sorry, I apologize.
Cress is it's okay. Cress is a kind of salad. It's actually slightly bitter.
Got it. So I don't exactly know why they called it this, but presumably they didn't have cress. You know, they love the taste of cress from their youth and whatever, you know, and they cooked up these beans and vinegar in some way that it tasted like cress, basically. So that's the simple explanation. I'm not sure if there's more deep ones, but that's the simple explanation. Either way, the point is it's just a story, but the idea is that would be prohibited if the chometz, the vinegar was yain nesach, because at the moment you put it in, it was there for benefit. Sorry if I missed you guys earlier. Yeah, I didn't realize.
It's okay.
Sound was off. Okay. Continues the Gemara now. We are 10 lines from the bottom ish. Amar Reish Lakish. Now this gets into another really, really complex detail about mixtures. And Reish Lakish's point, I'll speak it out quickly outside and then we'll read it inside, is that, of course, when you put anything, let's say you add some vinegar into a dish, right? The question is, does that vinegar make the dish taste better or worse, right? Remember, notin tam lifgam means that you don't enjoy the taste. It doesn't mean that it ruins it, right? If it ruins it and it's not edible, that's a whole different sugya, right? That means something that's not ra'ui lachilat adam, right, is not considered to be a problem, like chametz and things like that. You know, if it's not edible, we don't really talk about it as food stuff. So notein tam lifgam does not mean it ruins something that you can't eat it. It means you don't enjoy the taste. It makes it taste worse. You wish you didn't have that thing in there. Now, of course, when you're mixing in a dish, you often have many, many ingredients, and each individual ingredient has a small part in them. So what Reish Lakish is about to address is how do you view notein tam lifgam in light of everything else? Meaning, let's say I add vinegar into my cholent. Now, vinegar does not make my cholent taste better. But if my cholent had a lot of salt, maybe the vinegar would make it taste better. Or if it had a lot of some other spice, meaning if there's something else that the cholent was missing, and the reason it tastes bad is because it has vinegar and it's missing the salt, right? Is that notein tam lifgam or not notein tam lifgam? So says Reish Lakish today, again, around 10 lines from the bottom, notein tam lifgam she'amru. When we said that if a item of Isser is put into a dish and it gives it a worse taste, that's permitted. You don't have to call it Isser. Lo sheyomru, it's not, you can't say, for example, kederazu, you know, this dish, chesera melech, it has too little salt, or yetera melech, it has too much salt. Chesera tavlin, it's got too little spices, or yetera tavlin, it's got too much spices, meaning it can't be that the dish doesn't taste good because of multiple factors. It has no salt and too much vinegar. Ella kol she'ein chasera klum. And it has to be a dish that is perfect, the perfectly made dish. It's got the right amount of salt, the right amount of spices, the right amount of pepper. The eino nechelet b'nei bezeh. The only reason you don't want to eat it is because the vinegar is in it. Meaning everything else is good. And the one factor that made it that you don't desire it, and just to be clear, eino nechelet does not mean it's not edible, because that would be a different group. It means you don't want to eat it. The only reason you don't want to eat it is because of the vinegar or whatever isser you put in there. So this is a big chumrah. This is saying that when you look at notein tam lifgam, you have to imagine a desirable dish which is missing nothing else, and how bad is the taste given by the isser. That's the first language of Reish Lakish. Igadami, now there's some say the opposite in Reish Lakish. Amar Reish Lakish, the opposite. That notein tam lifgam she'amru, when you say the isser fell into it, gave a bad taste, and therefore it's not a prohibition. That was our Mishnah's halacha. That is ein omrim. You don't have to say kederazu chasera melech yetera melech tavlin yetera tavlin. Sorry, I missed the word. Ein omrim kederazu. This pot chasera melech. It's missing salt. Yetera melech. It has too much salt. Chasera tavlin. It's missing spices. Yetera tavlin, and that's why it doesn't taste good. So it's not because the vinegar dropped into it and therefore the vinegar is pagam. It's because it's because you're a bad cook, right? You didn't put the right ingredients in. Ella, what you say is hashta miha hapagma. The vinegar went into this dish, whatever was in the dish, and the vinegar did not improve the dish. It worsened the dish. The fact that the vinegar worsened the dish makes it that the vinegar does not prohibit that dish because it's notein tam lifgam. So that is the second language of Rish Lakish, which is a big kula, right? Which is that notein tam lifgam does not mean you have to view an ideally made dish. You look at just what was happened in front of you, and if this thing that fell into the isser, that fell into the heter, made it worse, it is not considered a benefit, and it therefore doesn't add a prohibition. And that's how we have Paskin, but we're going to see that in a second.
Why do you say it's an isser?
And that's what we're talking about, right? Where something that is asur fell into something mutar. And the question is, does the thing that's asur that fell into it prohibit the dish that's mutar? Right? The case in our mission was yain nesach that falls into a dish.
So we're talking about something that just doesn't taste good to you. That doesn't make it asur.
No. The assumption is, sorry, the case is, you have vinegar, let's say, that's yain nesach, that fell onto beans, right? The question is, does the vinegar that's yain nesach, which is asur, asur the beans, right? How does it asur? So we said in our Mishnah that it depends on whether it adds to taste or doesn't add to the taste. If it's notein tam, then it prohibits it. Remember, we always discuss notein tam means around 1/60th with exceptions, but that's the general rule. But if it doesn't add to the taste, or that I just said is neutral, but the Mishnah makes it sound like it's negative. If it harms the taste, it's pigam, it makes it worse, then it's permitted. You don't have to say, oh, there's vinegar of yain nesach in my dish, because I don't want the vinegar of yain nesach in my dish. But the question that Rish Lakish is addressing is, if the vinegar makes it taste worse, do you have to view it in context of everything else in the dish? And in his first opinion, he says yes. In his second opinion, he says no. And like I said, we're going to pass like the second opinion.
But it's not actually forbidden. It's not forbidden. Sorry.
It's not forbidden. If it's notein tam lifgam, if the isser, if the prohibited item that fell into the dish or fell into the mixture causes a degradation of taste, it does not make it prohibited. Now, just to be clear, there's a lot more details in that, because yesterday we talked about min bimino, min b'she'eno mino. What I just told you is certainly true about min b'she'eno mino, when they're two different types. We said yesterday, we're going to have this much more coming up, that if it's min bimino, it might be a different rule, right? If it's the same thing, it might not need to give it a favorable taste in order to prohibit it. Says Rabbi Avo, 3 lines in the bottom. I'm Rabbi Avo, I'm Rabbi Avo. Says Rabbi Avo and Rabbi Yochanan, another very interesting halacha, which is super complex, which is, says Rabbi Avo and Rabbi Yochanan, the challenge sometimes comes that you take an isser, you take something that's asur, say you take a piece of meat, right? That is nevela or whatever, right? And you drop it into a stew, which has, let's say no other meat, but it's a big stew. And so there's a tiny little piece of meat inside this big stew. It's potatoes and rice and beans and whatever. And the question is, it gives a flavor, right? So if it gives a flavor, it's prohibited, we said. But one of the questions that comes up is, do you get makot for eating that stew, right? Generally, we have a rule that if you eat a kizayit, bichdei achilat pras, right? We understand you're not always going to sit down and eat a kizayit of Isser at one time. But let's say you're eating it over bichdei achilat pras, which we usually say is 15 minutes, 18 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever. There's a lot of different shiurim, but some amount of time, right? An hour, there's different shiurim. You eat your kizayit bichdei achilat pras, you're over, you get makot and you get punished. But what if you are eating a mixture now, right? So the mixture basically has a little bit of meat that's prohibited and a lot of beans and potatoes, but the only thing that's prohibited might be the meat. So when do you get makot? So says Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Barvo and the Amar Rabbi Yochanan, that if it's ta'amo umamasho, if you have the taste of the prohibited thing, let's say the taste of the meat, and you have the essence of the meat, meaning you can see the meat or you can know the meat is there, then it's asur. Now everyone agrees that it's asur, but the chiddush he's adding is lokin alav. You get makot for eating the meat that's in the stew if you eat enough. V'zeu kizayit b'chdei achilat pras. And when the rabbi said, and the chachamim said that if you eat a kizayit in that period of time, this is what they were referring to, where you eat a mixture, that you're not just eating meat, right? Otherwise you would eat a kizayit real quickly. You're eating something that's a stew or a mixture that contains meat in it. I'm using meat. Same thing would be true about chametz or yayin or anything like that. So, but that's what we're referring to when the essence of the thing is still there. Now, what's the let's read part 2 of Rabbi Yochanan, right? Part 2, turn the page of Samach Zayin on the bed, is if you have ta'amo v'lo mamasho. Let's say you have a case where you have the taste of the isser, but you don't have any physical containment of the isser. Rashi's example, which raises a lot of discussion, is let's say you drop milk into meat, right? I mean, there's a debate whether Rashi does not say meat. That's the simplest way to read Rashi, is you drop milk into a pot, right? So there, the milk, let's say it's a meat pot, or that's one way to view it. The other way is that the milk might be asur milk because it's yayin nesech, because you can pour milk in front of a god, right? It's yayin nesech, or the milk is arla or something like that. I'm not sure how milk could be arla, but whatever. The milk is truma or something like that. So in all these cases, if the taste is there, the dish becomes prohibited, because we already said notain tam. If you give taste, you become prohibited. But since the object is not present because it gets absorbed into the dish, you can't get makot because you can't eat a kazayit of it. So it says Rabbi Yochanan, top line, ta'amo velo mamasho. If you have the taste of the isser in the pot, then asur. Then you're not allowed to eat that pot because it has, let's say, basar b'chalav, if it's wine and meat, right? It's a prohibition. But ein lokin alav, you don't get makot for that because there is no kazayit that you ate for that thing. Okay, so that is the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. And furthermore, says Rabbi Yochanan, v'im riba tam lifkam mutar. And if it adds a bad taste, then it's mutar completely. If you drop the milk into the dish and the milk makes it taste poorly, then it's no tain tam lifkam. It gave a taste that's bad, and therefore it's not prohibited at all. Now it says the word. What do you mean the word riba?
What about the opposite? If there's no taste, but the essence is there?
That's a really good question. I mean, the object is there, but it doesn't taste like anything.
Well, it was mixed in, but you don't taste it.
So, but explain, you don't taste it because it's too small, or because, meaning you put one piece of meat into like a humongous vat of beer or something like that, let's just say? Sounds disgusting.
Or what? No, or whatever it is. Let's say it's wine or it's meat, and
Right.
you don't taste it, and it's not. I mean, you know it was there, but you don't taste it.
Right. So I don't know. I can't give you a straightforward answer because I think it's a big machloket, to be honest with you, in Chulin about what you just asked, which is when the Isser is be'en, the Isser is still present. But in general,
I can't give you, but I can give you a different example. Rav Stephen Exler said when he was learning, now it's not exactly the same thing because it's minhag, but was learning between mincha and marv one night. The Tisha Yamim, what do you call it? Before Tisha B'Av, and he said he remembered that there's a question whether you can eat any meat, tasting meat on a dish or on Shabbat and whatever. So apparently there was some leftovers in his house that from the week before there was a little bit of wine mixed in the food to taste it, but he ate it and he didn't taste any wine. So he said that was probably okay. He knew it was there afterwards, but there was wine mixed into the food. That was a little bit of wine during the night, and he ate it as leftovers. And he realized afterward wine had been, but he didn't taste it. So he said, "Oh, it's probably okay."
So I don't want to comment on that case. I don't know. The general principle, though, is if you don't taste it, it doesn't make it usher. So if your piece of meat falls into your big thing of milk and you can't taste it, it's not usher. Now, there's a lot of exceptions to that general rule. I want to be very clear. And there is one concept that I recall, that if the isser is be'en, meaning it's still there, you can find it, that you're supposed to take it out and not use it. But I don't, but the general principle, which I think is we're gonna have to stick with because it's daf yomi and it's today's daf, is that if you don't taste the isser, then it's not usser. So if yayin nesech or basar b'chalav or chametz, well, chametz is a little different, but other things fall into it, then if you don't taste it, because it's, even if it's there, because it's so minuscule, right? It's a vat of 10,000 gallons and you drop, one drop in, you're not going to taste it. It's not a problem. But says the Gemara though, third line, sorry, a second line. Why did Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Avodah, name of Rabbi Yochanan, say im riba tam, if it added a taste lifkam, lema im natan tam lifkam mutar? Why didn't you just say if it gave a taste that's bad? Hakamashwan, in fact, what Rabbi Yochanan is teaching us is like the second language of Rish Lakish, that if it adds Sorry. If it adds a taste that's pigam, meaning it's not the only reason that it tastes bad. It's part of the reason. There's also too little salt and too much pepper and too much, but it adds to that. That's enough to say it doesn't count. So that's like Reish Lakish. The afal gav, the ika mili achrenaita, the pagma bahadei, even though there's other things that are causing this dish to taste poorly, since the wine you added or the vinegar or whatever you added to that negative taste, Hilchata Kalishna Batra de Reish Lakish. We pass like the second language of Reish Lakish, that Notein Tam Lefgam does not mean an imaginary perfect dish and this thing made it taste poorly. It means a real life. If the dish as it is was made worse by this thing, then it's mutar. Now, it says Rav Kahana, 5 lines from the top. Midivrei Kulam, from everybody we had so far today, back from the beginning, Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Rav Dimi, Rabbi Bar Chana, Reish Lakish, all of them you can see, they take a basic assumption, which is what our Mishnah assumed. Nilmad, we can learn from all of them that notein tam lifgam mutar, period, nikuda. If a isser gives a bad taste to the object it falls into, it's not a problem, period. Says Abaya says, look, I agree with you, but I want to disagree with you because I love doing that, says Abaya. Bishlamad mikulo l'chai. All of the rabbis, I agree with you, l'chaim, meaning yes to life, meaning it's true, except Reish Lakish. El de Reish Lakish, I don't agree that Reish Lakish holds that, because if you look back before, and I skipped over this conveniently, when Reish Lakish said the thing, he said, Notein tam lifgam she amru. When they say Notein tam lifgam is mutar, it means this case. Whenever you go up and say, when they say something, it implies, I don't necessarily agree with it, right? But everyone seems to feel this way. This is what it means. So Reish Lakish said the words amru. They said, Ka'amar, the Leilo sphere, like he doesn't necessarily hold Notein Tam Lefgam is mutar. Says Michlal, the Ikal, Mandamar, Notein Tam Lefgam Asur. What do you mean? Our Mishnah made it very clear. Anything that gives a bad taste is mutar. There's really somebody, a Tana, who Reish Lakish would rely on, who would say Notein Tam Lefgam is asur, that if you poured wine into something and it made it taste terrible, it would still be asur. Says yeah, there is a Tanya like that. There's a Tana like that, Vatanya, this is a support, this is a Braita, which says, midway through Daf Samach Zayin on Bet, Echad Notein Tam Lefgam, Ve'echad Notein Tam L'Shevach, Asur. If an Isser falls into something and it gives a good taste or it gives a bad taste, the thing's prohibited. Divrei Rebbe Meir. That is the opinion of the Tana Rebbe Meir, which obviously we don't pass like, it's from everyone's experience. But that is the opinion of Rebbe Meir. And Rebbe Shimon says, the mainstream opinion, which is L'Shevach Asur. If the Isser that fell in contributed to benefit, then it's asur. Lipigam mutar. If it made it worse, then it's mutar. Says the Gemara. Now again, our Mishnah very clearly said like Rabbi Shimon, and all the rabbis say like Rabbi Shimon, and that's the halacha, right? But there is an opinion of Rabbi Meir that notein tam lifgam is also asur. Now, my time at Rabbi Meir, what's Rabbi Meir's source for that? How does he get so ambitious to say that? Rabbi Meir says, I know how to read the Torah. Look, it's very straightforward. Gamar migi ule of chavim. Look, the one case we have in the Torah where they had to kasher their dishes was when at the end of Sefer Bamidbar, right? When they went and they had a war with Midian, and they showed up from the war, they had taken all of the shalal. What's shalal in English? Anyways, they took all the rewards, right? They stole everything, right? They took all the captive stuff, the booty from the war. That's the word. And they came home, and Elazar the Kohen said to them, and there's a whole parsha in the Torah that you have to kasher your things, right? Kol asher yavo ba'esh taviru ba'esh, kol asher yavo b'mayim taviru b'mayim. Like if it was done with fire, you got to get a blowtorch or burn it up. If it was done with water, you got to wash it out. So you see there that they had to kasher the kalim. Now, why do they have to kasher the kalim that they took from Midian? Obviously, if you take a pot from Midian and you come back, whatever treif taste is in that pot is not giving good. You don't want that taste, right? That taste is almost always notein tam lifgam. So ovdei kochavim, says the Gemara, yule ovdei kochavim, things that are cooked with meat from ovdei kochavim, lav notein tam lifgamhu. Isn't it something that's notein tam lifgam v'asar rachmana? And the Torah says you gotta kasher the pots. Why would you ever have to kasher pots? You get a pot from someone. Now the Gemara assumes that they're old, right? Because they traveled through war. The taste gets bad over time. Whatever small bits of ham were sitting in this pot are gonna add a bad flavor to your coffee, right? You want to make hot water for your coffee in the pot. You don't want the taste of ham in that, I hope, right? So why would you ever have to kosher it? Wash it out so you eat it, and then it should be not a problem. It's no tain tam lifgam, right? Which would make life very easy. Says Gemara, and that's what Rabbi Yochanan said. Achanami lo shana. The idach. Now, what would Rabbi Shimon and everyone else say about that? Kid Rav Huna Breid Rav Chia. The Amr Rav Huna Breid Rav Chia. You know, Rav Huna Breid Rav Chia says about the whole story of Midyan. Lo asrat Torah ela keder bat yuma. The only prohibition of the pots of Midyan were pots that were used that morning. The lo lifkam, who, right? To get lo lifkam, who? Because it's not a pagam. Because they cooked breakfast sausages in the pot this morning. You come home, those sausages still, the taste would be delicious. If you put your rice in that pot and you cooked it, it would taste better. And so the whole Torah's discussion, which obviously is pretty far-fetched to say this, right? But the whole Torah's discussion about koshering the pots and throwing out the pots, and if it's a kli cheres, you got to get rid of it, and if it's a kli matechet, and a kli, the whole discussion in the pasuk is only referring to pots that were used that morning to cook, and they get back to the camp, and they have a discussion that afternoon, right? What do you do with these pots? So which again is far-fetched, but that's what Ravidi Bar Avin said. Rav Huna Breid Rav Chia said, and that's the conversation. Because if the pots were old, they would be considered to be notein tam lifgam, and they wouldn't need koshering, which is a shocking thing.
No, I mean, isn't that the halacha that if a pot hasn't been used and people rely on that? I've been in places of asked Rabbi and so forth, and you're borrowing a pot, and if they always ask, has it been used in the last 24 hours? If it's not, bidi evet, you could use that pot. I mean, ideally it should be kosher, but the halacha, they say that if it hasn't been used in the last 24 hours, you could use that pot. Granted, it should be tava, it should be washed, it should be kosher. But if you know that it hasn't been used in the last 24 hours, you can use that pot.
So Ken, 100%. That is the opinion that our Gemara said, that Rabbi Shimon Paskin, that all the Amoraim agreed with, that our Mishnah said that if it's notein tam lifgam, if it gives a bad taste, which is assumed, any pot that's not been used in that day gives a bad taste. And there are, of course, exceptions, but let's say that's the general rule, is permitted. The question that Rabbi Meir is asking on your opinion that you heard, Ken, that our Gemara says, is why does the Torah care about the pots of Midyan? If you show up for more and you've got pots, why do you have to kosher them? Presumably they're more than a day old in usage. And the answer we're giving is that the Torah was only referring to the case where the pots were used that morning, which again is pretty far-fetched when you're thinking about a war and returning. But that is how you have to Rabbi Shimon, and everyone who relies on this heter of notein tam lifgam would have to explain the psukim. And idach, what Rabbi Meir would say to you is that now Rabbi Meir's concept is fascinating, because Rabbi Meir would say to you, kedera bat yuma nami yefshar lo pagma porta, that even a kedera that was used that morning, nobody likes cooking in a dirty pot, right? Which sounds very true, right? Nobody likes cooking in a dirty pot. And so even if it was used that day, when you get that pot, you want to wash out that pot. You want to get rid of the smell in the pot. And therefore, says Rabbi Meir, every dirty pot is considered to be notein tam lifgam. You don't have to wait, according to you, 24 hours when you go to the restaurant. You can use the same pot that they used 5 minutes ago for the beef bolognese, because you don't want your beef bolognese taste in your pasta. That's what Rabbi Meir says you would say. Now, says Rabbi Meir, therefore I tell you that notein tam lifgam is asur, because clearly you can't do that. But that's what I learned, and that's why I disagree with your halacha. But we do not paskin like Rabbi Meir, as you pointed out. We paskin like Rabbi Shimon and our Mishnah, that in fact notein tam lifgam is mutar, and that some pots are considered to be a good taste. And says Rabbi Shimon,
Meir says that what he can use it even that day. What did he say?
The mayor says that even if it gives a bad taste, you can never use it. So whether it's 24 hours old or 4 hours old or 5 years old, if there was isser in this pot, the isser stays in the pot, and you can never use that pot unless you kosher it. Once you kosher it, you can use it. And ask my Rabbi Shimon my time. Now, what's Rabbi Shimon's reason to say that notein tam lifgam is a thing and it permits the thing? To Tanya, because it's based on the following brayta. The brayta says, we had just in this week's parsha, it says by nevela, right? Lo tochlu kol nevela. Don't eat an animal that dies in the field that's not shechted, right? It's a nevela. Leger asher b'sha'arecha titnu, right? You should give it to a ger in your tents, right? In your neighborhood. Now, what do we understand from that pasuk? That kol haru'uya leger, anything that tastes good, and you could give it to a ger, and they would say thank you for this, slice of meat. is called nevela, kriya nevela. But she'ein, turn to the top of Daf Samech Chet Amud Aleph, she'ein ruya leger, something that would not be eaten by a ger because it doesn't taste good, something that is not desirable, eino kriya nevela. It's not called nevela. The prohibition of the Torah are things that taste good. If something makes a bad taste, then it's not considered to be the Isser. Says Rabbi Meir, that's really far-fetched, because really all the pasuk is telling you, the pasuk is only referring to a case where the meat was ruined from the beginning, meaning the animal died in the field, you came along this carcass, and it's disgusting already. There it's saying, that's not a nevela. But if it was something that was good, right, the animal was slaughtered, let's say, or killed by a hunter, and it was good, and now it's gone bad, there's no proof to me, says Rabbi Meir, that would lose its tam of Isser, right, lose its name of Isser. And Rabbi Shimon says that clearly is not what it's talking about, because you don't need a pasuk to tell you that an animal that is ruined from the beginning, meaning it started off as inedible, is permitted. Because afra ba'amu, that's like dirt. That's not even an animal. That's considered to be just disgusting, right? So clearly the Torah is not telling me, says Rabbi Shimon, that the animal has to be edible once. It's telling me that the animal has to be edible, not edible, it has to be good now. It has to be something you would want to give to someone to eat. And if it's something that you would not want to give to someone because it has a bad taste, then it's not considered an Isser Nevela, right? I mean, obviously, we don't go around eating things just for that reason. But if it's something that does not contribute positively to the taste, the Isser is no longer there. And therefore, says Rabbi Shimon, and this again is how we paskin, that if you take something that's asur, whether it's yain nesach, or it's nevela, or maybe basar b'chalav, that's much more complicated, but or truma, or tameh, or things like that, and you add it into something else, and it gives a bad taste. By bad taste, meaning someone else doesn't want to eat it, then it doesn't add Isser. It's not prohibited. And you can eat that thing if you want. Obviously, it's edible. Otherwise, you wouldn't eat it. You can eat that thing. Now, we're going to see tomorrow. We're going to stop here.
How do you make the distinction between the hunter? If the hunter just kills the animal and it's a good animal, then
it's okay.
So where's the Isser then?
No, so that's nevela, right? So that's Isser of nevela. But the Isser of nevela only remains on that animal as long as it's edible. Once the animal becomes not good to eat, then the Isser nevela goes off the animal. And if it gets mixed in with your good meat, with your challah, it wouldn't make an Isser in the challah.
Well, when is it no longer considered nevela?
When it's no longer desirable to eat. When it's not something you would want to give to a ger in your tents, in your gates. So once it's not something you would want to give to somebody else because they would say it's disgusting or not tasteful, then it's no longer called nevela for this purpose, and it doesn't prohibit other things that it gets mixed into.
You could see that in either one of these, the animal that's on the roadside or the animal killed by the hunter. At some point, both of them could fall into that category where it's no longer desirable.
That's not what Rabbi Meir says, that it would only apply to an animal that was started off that was never edible, right? And was found basically disgusting. But if it started off edible and it's now, again, not disgusting, but it adds just a negative flavor, Rabbi Meir says it still is prohibited from nevela. So it depends on the degree of how bad it is. I was going to say that tomorrow, and as we go on, we're going to discuss some interesting details about how about the proportion, right? Because let's say you drop, this is going to be the next Gemara, you drop one or two, bits of wine into a dish and it doesn't taste poorly. But if you add more and more, it starts tasting bad, right? At what point do you say that the wine passels it or doesn't passel? I mean, how do you view combinations as they go? Because obviously this is quite complex. Reish Lakish started addressing that today by saying, what about the other spices in the dish, right? But we're going to continue and get more and more into this question of something that gives a favorable taste or an unfavorable taste and how it adds to the Isser. And we're going to actually continue this until the end of the Masechta in a week and 2 days. So very exciting.
We have raised that question of proportion about a week ago.
Well, we're gonna get back to it tomorrow. Okay, Shavua Tov, everyone. Chodesh Tov.
Chodesh Tov.
I'm gonna be away next Shabbat, so I think I'm gonna record ahead of time. I'm gonna try to do it today, so I do it way ahead of time, so we can upload it properly. But I'll be in Israel, God willing. So.
Oh wow! Again,
God, I'm hopefully going tomorrow, but
very nice
with some kids. Okay, but so I hopefully will see you all again in person at the next Masechta, which is Horiot, which is a blink and you'll miss it. It's 1 week, so we gotta show up.
All right. Shavua Tov, Chodesh Tov.